Welcome to the MAM Journals here in lockdown Britain. It's a series of 6 videos that I'm making on the basis that as we can't ride them, we might as well talk about them. And these are based on an introductory level, and if there's anybody with more expert knowledge viewing, then hopefully you continue to view through and add a bit of your insight and information in the comments box below. So what I'm hoping to cover today is the history of the bike. I'll also be covering some of the technical features, and finally I'll be talking about what it's like to run and own as an owner in the real world. So, history. I think the first thing we should talk about is World's Superbike regulations. In order to enter a bike in the World Superbike, a series that started in 1988, you needed a bike that was based on something that you can actually buy in a showroom. That process is called homologation. And you also needed to either make a decision as to what category of engine you were running, because you could run up to 750 on a 4, or you could run up to 999 cc's on a twin. Now Honda, anticipating the opening of the series, had already developed a 750 V4 called the RC30. That was a stunning looking bike and was fast straight out of the crate. They enjoyed great success with it, ridden by an American by the name of Fred Merkel, who won the championship in 88 and 89. But Ducati were getting their act together and they were leveraging the advantage of the CC. And in 1990, a Frenchman by the name of Raymond Roche won the championship on an 851 Ducati. Now the RC30 was enjoying a lot of success in lots of different series, but was struggling to keep up in World Superbikes. So they came to the conclusion that they needed to develop another bike. And rather than go the twin route, they went again for the 4, and they developed a bike called the RC45. They launched it in 1994. Aaron Slight was a regular rider on the bike, a Kiwi, but they'd also employed at various stages Carl Fogarty to see if they could get the bike to win. They did win races, but they struggled to deliver the consistency from circuit to circuit. And in 1997, as part of their revolving door of expert riders working alongside Aaron, they employed a mercurial American by the name of John Kowensky. He had a reputation of being able to pedal bikes slightly faster than they really wanted to go, which was exactly what Honda needed. And indeed, he delivered the outcome. He won the championship on the RC45 in 1997. So they then began to develop this bike. Actually, Aaron talks about going for testing on a mule bike that was based on the Honda Firestorm, which was a road bike, to see how they thought they could perhaps develop a twin. It was pretty slow, but the conclusion was, although Honda had a preference for developing 4s, and even at the late stage of development there were still discussions going on internally, they did recognise that it actually might be easier to get a twin with extra cc's to take on Ducati. Honda were also of the view that the regulations weren't really fair, and the extra 250 cc's was what was actually making the difference. A lot of it was down to the ability of the bikes to put down the power, and certainly the RC45 wasn't short of power in that regard, and Aaron Slight speaks very highly of the power of the bike. It was just very tricky to set up. So they began to build this bike, which is not based on a Firestorm. They started from scratch effectively, just working on the same principle that was going to be a V-twin. They launched this in the year 2000, and they were supported by the Castrol Honda team, which was the works team effectively, and a young Texan rider who was getting near the peak of his powers, although he still had some more to come as his later career showed. And they enjoyed success straight out of the box. This bike, or the racing version of it, won the 2000 World Superbike Series. And although it wasn't the objective, it also won in the Isle of Man with Joey Dunlop in the F1 race. Joey had actually tested this in the Northwest 200 and said to the factory, it's a good bike, but it's not fast enough. I won't win on that in the Isle of Man. So they actually gave him Aaron Slight's spare engine in order to go and win that particular race, and he did. Tragically, Joey was actually killed, I think it was weeks later, in a fairly nondescript race in Estonia, but he certainly did a fantastic job on his very short spell on the SPW, which was the race version of this bike. So they enjoyed great success in the opening year. In 2001, Ducati launched the 996R, which was a significant step up from the 996, I think it was the SPS that they were running the year previously, and a close fought series, and Troy Bayliss won the championship. In 2002, Honda came back with the SP2, a further evolution of this base bike, and they again won the championship in a titanic struggle with Ducati. If anybody hasn't seen the last race at Imola in the 2002 championship, I recommend it. Don't watch the highlights, watch the whole thing. If you haven't seen it, you must have been in a time capsule, but it is a fantastic race showing really two riders at the peak of their powers on very evenly matched bikes, slugging it out for a world championship. Exciting racing. They also enjoyed in 2002, they won the AMA Superbike Series with a young American called Nicky Hayden, who proved to be quite useful in later years as well. And they did enjoy other success in other series. But actually Honda at that point, having proved the point, said we're going to pull out of work-supported racing, and they curtailed their efforts. They continued to support privateer groups in a less obvious way, but their time as a works team had drawn to a close. They didn't enter superbikes again as a works environment until they could go back to making fours. So let's have a look around the bike and talk about some of the technicalities. Starting at the front of the bike, perhaps the first distinctive feature to point out is the unusually large air intake in between the headlamps. This leads to a rectangular box section that in turn goes into an opening in the hollow aluminium headstock and directly into the air filter under the petrol tank. Clearly they want to make sure the engine got plenty of air. Externally, another distinctive feature is the hollow aluminium alloy frame and swinging arm, and a shared engine and swinging arm pivot point. Magnesium covers are visible on both the front sprocket cover and the engine casing. For the more attentive amongst you, don't be alarmed by the lack of oil in the window. If you can see oil when the bike is on the side stand, you've definitely overfilled it. The heart of this bike is of course the engine. It's a liquid cooled 90 degree 999cc V-twin with short skirted pistons, Nickersill protected barrels, which is a form of ceramic coating, gear driven cams and fuel injection. In showroom state it produced 122 brake horsepower and allegedly did 163 miles an hour, which sounds about right. It weighs 199 kilos, which in old money is about 439 pounds. And to give you a comparison to a bike of a similar purpose, the Ducati 996R, which actually is going to be covered in the next video, that weighs 190 kilos. So the Honda is slightly heavier in showroom trim, but clearly neither bike actually raced at these weights. If for a moment we ignore the generic names SP1, RC51, there are actually different designations for the models as they evolved. The 2000 model, of which this is one,
were actually designated as Ys. 2001 was the SP1, and logically the 2002 model, the SP2. They didn't develop the bike further, and the last bike produced, which I think was for the American market, was in 2006. The race bikes, based on the various models, were actually called the SPWs.
So what's it like to live with? Well, I've been privileged enough to own this bike since it was new, and I'm slightly embarrassed to tell you I've only done 3,700 miles on the bike, and I better explain why. Every year I vow to myself I'm going to do more miles on that bike. I take it out for a 100-mile run, and anybody who's got one will know that's about a tank full. And when I get back, I vow to myself that I'm only going to ride it when the chiropractors and the dentists are open, because it does do my back in and it will take your fillings out. And they are pretty firm. You have to ride them in a pretty positive sort of way, because they don't turn as easily as some other bikes. Indeed, journalists at the time used to complain to Honda and say, you really need to make that bike a little bit more road friendly. And Honda, and I respect them for it, used to say it's a race bike. If you want to have an easier road bike, buy a road bike. I think that's right. So if any of my comments sound like criticisms, they're not. It is a bike that was designed for a very specific purpose, and it was the bike on which they based their World Championship efforts, and it delivered to that outcome. Mechanically, it's been fantastic. I've not had any problems with it in 20 years of ownership. You might say, well, 3,700 miles, why should you? But time takes its toll on all of this, and I have to say it's beautifully put together and mechanically engineered. It doesn't drink a drop of oil, and the only thing it won't actually pass is the petrol pump. So a great bike. I think they are tricky to ride. As I say, I don't think it's a bike for an inexperienced rider. I know ex-racers or committed track day guys will have no trouble riding one of these at all and thoroughly enjoy it, mastering it and getting the maximum out of it. I actually think on the road, in the right hands, probably better hands than mine if I'm honest, this could still actually hold a lot of bikes at bay, even today, 20 years on, which is quite some feat. So one of the questions I ask myself with bikes is, if I could only have one bike, would this be the one? And I've got to be honest and say, if it was only one, no, this is a little bit too extreme for me to cover all my motorcycling needs. But I'm very fortunate, and I know that quite a few people are fortunate enough to have more than one bike. And if you can have more than one, I would highly commend one of these for the garage. It's a great bit of Honda history and heritage, and I think it's a joy to own, and I've certainly enjoyed my ownership of it. In terms of buying one, and some of you might be interested in the views of what the market is, it might be useful if I talked about the RC30, the RC45 and the RC51 in terms of pricing. When they were new, an RC30 was about £8,000 if you were lucky enough to be Dane suitable to actually own one. And nowadays you probably have to pay maybe mid-30s to get a really nice one. I have seen some down at sort of late 20s, but I think they've probably been in a few fights. RC45 was £18,700. No. The RC45 was £17,800. And that was a lot of money in 1994 when they launched it. You could get a 916 and another bike for that sort of price, but they didn't have any trouble selling them, and they don't have any trouble selling them now. Though I regularly see those go through auction at circa £35,000. This bike actually retailed at just over £10,000, and you could actually get a deal on one because they didn't fly out the showrooms, to be honest, and you could actually get a very nice far blade, which is a pretty fast bike and probably a little easier to ride than this one, for about £8,000. So they did struggle to move them. Nowadays, I've seen them going anything between £5,000 and £10,000. I think £5,000 will get you one that needs a bit of work on, and £10,000 certainly used to get you a nice one. They do seem to be appreciating, and I have seen on a social media site that one apparently went for £15,000 in like this original condition, but whether or not that proves to be an urban myth remains to be seen. So, as I say, I've been delighted with the ownership of it. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please put any of your comments or observations in the section below. I do appreciate it. And I hope that you'll join me again. The next bike is going to be the 996R. Thank you.